following in the tradition of Christian reworkings of older material, are responding to thereof. The Treasures of the Magi, a study of modern Zoroastrianism. Content: Zoroaster and the Parsis, the teaching of Zarathustra, the religion of the latter Avesta, the Parsis, the priesthood, ceremonial life, fire temples and towers of silence, orthodoxy and reform, Parsi piety, the Parsis and Christian propaganda, the crown of Zoroastrianism, and the index, James Hope Moulton. And okay, the editor obviously is trying to show that Christianity is, that this is a series that tries to put forward the idea that Christianity is the pinnacle of these things. Like somehow God couldn't reveal a good religion, and maybe humans lost it. That makes more sense, or messed it up, and then to remind them. But that somehow it was a development into something great like Christianity. But anyways, and forward. In the autumn of 1915, on the invitation of the Indian National Council of the YMCA, 3 scholars from England, Dr. T.R. Glover of Cambridge, Dr. James Hope Moulton of Manchester, and Professor George Hare Leonard of Bristol, went out to spend a year in India. The plan was that these men, who were distinguished alike for their writings and for their close contact with the student world, should spend this year in studying some of the problems of education and of religion in India, getting time for making friendships with Indians. Hindu, I mean, in terms of race, right? And at the same time, in doing some lecturing and writing, and whilst each was asked to travel for part of the time in order to see something of India and to visit the missions of his own communion, he was also invited to spend several months in a single community in order to have time for closer study and for the forming of closer friendships. It was hoped that books of considerable value might result from this close contact of English thinkers with the religious thought of India. All did excellent service by lecturing to the mixed audiences in various centers, and by teaching groups of Christian students, and they were everywhere welcomed with the deep respect which scholarship meets in India, and with great cordiality. Even more significant than the interest which these lectures stirred up were the friendships which they made with the Indians, and which they valued very greatly, in India, not America or something like that. To Dr. Moulton, the invitation was full of attractiveness. He was always a missionary enthusiast, and he was thrilled by the prospect of seeing the field for himself. For years, he had studied the religion of the Parsis, and now there opened out before him the opportunity of personal intercourse with them, dialogue. I don't think people generally think of dialogue in those words. Under ordinary conditions, it would not have been possible to entertain the proposition on account of other duties, but the war had so affected all theological colleagues that a prolonged absence could be contemplated as not involving of necessity any serious interpretation of his normal work. Moreover, coming, as it did, within a week after he had lost his wife, the invitation seemed to open out for him a course of service in a fresh field, just as at the time when service on the old field was bound to be so fraught with pain, when another heavy sorrow came to him while he was in India, in the death of his eldest son, who was killed at the front in France on the 4th of August in 1916, he continued to seek consolation in service and teaching, and he did not seek in vain. It is to his son that this volume is dedicated. He has been invited to go to India, largely that he might use his ripe Iranian scholarship in lecturing to the Parsis on Zoroastrianism, and he received from that community everywhere proofs of the warmest possible friendship and regard, and of the keenest interest in his teaching. In Bombay they placed at his disposal a large theatre, and have since published his lectures in both English and Gujarati. He remained some 16 months in India and sailed from Karachi by the SS City of Paris for England. At Port Said he had the joy of meeting his friend, Dr. Rendell Harris, who had left England several months before in order to join Dr. Moulton in India, but having been torpedoed in the Mediterranean, had stayed on in Egypt instead of proceeding to India. The two friends sailed together and had a time of delightful intercourse until the steamer was sunk by a torpedo in the Gulf of Lyons. I'm hoping it means the same thing as in the earlier part, but yeah, I'm sure that, that was like illegal in England, I think, at the time. But yeah, they talked. Passengers and crew got into the boats, but the weather was very stormy, and the boat in which the two scholars were driven out of its course, and did not reach the coast of Corsica until 4 days later. Of the 25 souls in the boat, 12 had by that time died of exposure, and among them Dr. Moulton. The following paragraphs are from a letter written by Dr. Harris to Dr. Moulton's brother, the Reverend W. Fidian Moulton of Derby, a few days after the tragic event. I am not able to write a great deal, and much of what I say must wait until I return. First of all, because we were strongly advised not to communicate any details as to the passage of our unfortunate vessel, and second, because it is too painful to recall in detail the horrors of the days of exposure and collapse. I think that what operated in his case to diminish his power of resistance was, first of all, physical weakness, which had shown itself on the way home from India in a violent outbreak of boils on the face and neck, causing him much pain and inconvenience. But on the other side he succumbed to superior spiritual attraction, which he felt a long time before the ship was struck. He talked about his dear ones in Johannine language, as going over to prepare places for one another, and the spiritual tension was evidently stronger than even the strong language expressed. Those on the other side stood to him Christ-wise, saying Christ's words and doing Christ's deeds to him as they had done to one another. Under the circumstances, it is not strange that he should have collapsed, but he played a hero's part in the boat. Now, in general, Christian arguments tend to only work on people who've been indoctrinated with Christianity. Now, if they stepped away from Christianity, that's one thing. But, it's easier for certain arguments to bring people back, per se. And also we have people who don't know much about the faith that they're claiming. Some of those people can be seduced by Christian arguments. But people who know well about Christianity and about the faith they're claiming, conversion